Welcome, everyone. We'll begin in a minute. We're just waiting for more people to join us for the webinar. Thank you to everybody joining in from across the world. We'll begin in a minute. We have just opened the webinar, so we're just waiting for people to log in. Okay, I think we can begin now. A good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone joining us from across the world. And because today we are focusing on Tanzania, allow me to say habari za mchana, habari za jioni, na habari za asubuhi. Many of you will know that this event was rescheduled from 25 March to today with respect for the 14-day mourning period for Tanzania's late President John Magufuli. We thank you for joining us, and our thoughts are with our colleagues from Tanzania. So, karibu, welcome to the Implementing Climate Smart Agriculture Innovation, Inclusivity and Capacity Building webinar. There is significant focus on achieving and upscaling climate smart agriculture, with particular emphasis on delivering benefits to smallholder farmers. Despite the high level of knowledge around what technologies and practices work on the ground, there is poor understanding of how smallholder farmers access beneficial outcomes and how to effectively implement CSA at scale. Today, our webinar is going to focus on AFRICAP's research into climate smart agriculture implementation in Tanzania. GCRF Agricultural and Food Systems Resilience, Increasing Capacity and Advising Policy, AFRICAP, is a £9.2 million program to make agriculture and food production in sub-Saharan Africa more productive, sustainable, and resilient to climate change. Working with local organizations and governments in Malawi, South Africa, Tanzania, and Zambia, we are creating an evidence base to underpin new country-specific policies in agriculture and food production. In today's webinar, we'll hear how the project is supporting implementation of climate resilient policy options through cross-disciplinary research to build evidence based on climate resilience strategies in Tanzania, and how this is feeding into capacity building and knowledge sharing. We will receive presentations from the University of Leeds researchers, Dr. Susannah Sallu, Dr. Harriet Smith, and Ms. Marta Gaworek-Michalczenia. I'm sorry, Marta, I'm probably murdering your name. I'm sure she'll introduce herself properly later. The presentations will be followed by two invited discussants who will provide reflective responses situating AFRICAP's research within the broader ambitions of upscaling climate-smart agriculture across East and Southern Africa, as well as within the policy context of Tanzania. Our two discussants, the first one is going to be Dr. John Recha, who is a senior scientist for the CGIR research program on climate change, agriculture, and food security, working from the International Livestock Research Institute, ILRI. Welcome, John. The second discussant is going to be Mr. Prosper Makundi, who is the acting head of Environment Management Unit and the Ministry of Agriculture in Tanzania. Welcome, Mr. Makundi. So you, as the participants, will then have an opportunity to ask questions and share your insights. Already I've seen we have people joining us from New York, from Malawi, from Tanzania, and even from Asia. So welcome to everybody. Please, I want to say feel at home because that's the natural sort of thing that goes with welcome. So Karibu, I hope you're going to learn a lot from this webinar, and I also hope that you are also going to be able to share some of the insights based on the work that you do. At this point, I would like us to get straight into the first part of the presentations, and I invite Dr. Sallu to make her presentation. Maybe before Dr. Sallu comes in, just a reminder of the Zoom etiquette. We have disabled the sort of audio and video functions for all the participants so that we minimize the distractions that we might experience. And we also ask that you use the Q&A function to deposit your questions or to deposit any sort of insights that you might have. For general comments, please use the chat function and ensure that your message is directed to all participants and panelists. The session is being recorded, so for any questions or concerns, you are welcome to contact the AFRICAP team through the email address that has been provided. The recordings of the webinar will be shared with everybody after the webinar. Let me invite Susie at the stage to come in for her presentation.
Thank you very much, Tembi. This webinar presents the outcomes of collaborative interdisciplinary research undertaken over the past 4 years, led by myself, Marta and Harriet, who will present. This research has focused on the implementation of integrated approaches to tackling climate change alongside development, particularly climate-smart agriculture in rural Tanzania. This research that has been undertaken in collaboration with multiple partners, including the European Union-funded Global Climate Change Alliance Programme and implementing partners, Orgware, Tanzania Forest Conservation Group and Muheza District Council, and also the CGIR Climate Smart Village team from the Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security Programme, from whom we have representation today from John at the International Livestock Research Institute, and also involving the Tanzanian Agricultural Research Institute, and particularly the team at the Celian office. So a bit of background. To transform agriculture into a climate resilient sector, the international research and development community is focusing significant efforts and investment in achieving and upscaling climate smart agriculture, with particular emphasis on delivering benefits to smallholder farmers. The World Bank describes climate smart agriculture as an integrated approach to managing landscapes that include cropland, livestock, forests and fisheries, that address the interlinked challenges of food security and climate change. Tanzania's definition of climate smart agriculture was set out in the country's National Climate Smart Agriculture Guideline, published in 2017. The definition recognizes action and emphasizes action to tackle the triple win challenge in agriculture, and to firstly, sustainably increase agricultural productivity and income. Secondly, increase the ability to adapt and build resilience to climate change, in particular, reducing vulnerability to climate-related stresses and shocks and supporting adaptation. And thirdly, enhance food and nutritional security while achieving mitigation co-benefits in line with national development priorities. In Tanzania, climate smart agriculture is promoted in the current National Agricultural Sector Development Programme and as a key action to mainstream resilience for climate change variability and natural disasters. Specific climate smart agriculture ambitions and guidance for implementation are set out in the National Agriculture Resilience Plan and the National Climate Smart Agriculture Guideline. Despite the promotion of climate smart interventions in national policy, and some of those interventions can be seen in this table here, and despite quite a high level of scientific knowledge on what technologies and practices work on the ground, knowledge gaps remain. There is still poor understanding of how smallholder farmers access beneficial outcomes from changes in agricultural practices and how to effectively achieve climate smart agriculture across much larger scales. In the following two presentations, Marta and Harriet will draw on their empirical research, which provides new evidence to help fill some of these knowledge gaps. They will discuss approaches and outcomes of implementing climate smart agriculture, explore who does and does not benefit from program implementation and why, and raise questions about the viability of and challenges with global ambitions of upscaling climate smart agriculture. They will end with their reflections and recommendations before passing back to me to wrap up this presentation. So passing over now to Marta.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. So my name is Marta Gaworek-Michalczenia, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Leeds. My presentation today will look into the impacts of development intervention that is focused on adaptation to climate change, particularly the impacts on reducing vulnerability and building livelihood resilience in communities where agriculture is the main livelihood activity. In recent years, there has been increased interest from development practitioners in reducing vulnerability to climate change and building resilience of households, communities, or sometimes even entire landscapes. Resilience building really became so popular that almost all development interventions now have resilience components in their programs, including climate smart agriculture. However, development practitioners faced sometimes difficulties with designing, implementing, and evaluating vulnerability and resilience interventions. The issues often relate to conceptualizing and quantifying of those concepts, also choosing appropriate indicators, etc. Sometimes development actors lack capacities such as financial resources to perform intensive data collection and also technical expertise to progress with data evaluations, which is necessary for robust impact assessment. So we can say that as a result, development actors may fall short in their programmatic contributions to reducing vulnerability and building livelihood resilience, which is extremely important, not only for monitoring those programs, but also for broader accountability in our responses to climate change issues. So in this study, we assess the impact of a Global Climate Change Alliance's flagship adaptation project in Tanzania on reducing vulnerability and building livelihood resilience. And we try to present some recommendations for designing a future intervention or similar projects. So this research that I'm talking about was conducted among agricultural communities of the East Usambara Mountains, which are located in Tanga region in northeastern Tanzania, that is presented on the map. The Global Climate Change Alliances project that formed the basis of this research is named Integrated Approaches for Climate Change Adaptation in the East Usambara Mountains. The project was implemented between 2015 and 2019 by two non-governmental organizations, which was Orgware, a Spanish NGO that specializes mostly in water engineering, and also domestic Tanzania Forest Conservation Group, and also Muheza District Council. The project had like a broader aim that was to demonstrate efficient strategies that support poor households to adapt to the negative impacts of climate change, and also to alleviate poverty. And it was also there were also some more specific objectives related to supporting communities in the Usambara Mountains to increase and diversify their income, strengthen resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change. And to achieve those objectives, the project implemented a variety of capacity building and income generating activities, including climate smart agricultural technologies and agricultural extension, and also a suite of supporting projects, for instance, butterfly farming, dairy livestock training, saving groups, ecotourism. There was many different activities, and some of them supported the broader village structures and networks that oversee forest, lands, and water management. I should also mention that the research was pursued as part of a collaborative partnership between University of Leeds, Sokon University of Agriculture, and the implementing organizations. This research followed the project activities in real time over a three-year period, and we anticipated that during the research implementation route, certain learning processes would emerge, and that will enable us to gather those lessons and of course, feedback into future adaptation and resilience projects design. In terms of methodology, it was a mixed method research. The implementing organizations collected household survey information before the implementation of the project in 2016, and then after the project was completed in 2019. And this provided us with panel data of the same households before and after the intervention. And also during my PhD fieldwork, I collected ethnographic qualitative data that was mostly focused on observing the project implementation processes. Yes, during this research, we developed an analytical framework for evaluating the impact of adaptation and resilience intervention. And we used this framework to evaluate the impact of the Global Climate Change Alliances project on reducing vulnerability and building livelihood resilience. And this framework, which is presented here, was partially adopted from Speranza's conceptual and analytical framework of characterizing livelihood resilience. Speranza defines livelihood resilience, I put it here, as the ability to maintain and enhance livelihood functioning despite changes, including shocks and stresses. Generally, the authors distinguish three main dimensions of livelihood resilience, which are represented by various livelihood characteristics that are necessary to maintain and enhance livelihoods. And those dimensions are buffer capacity, self-organization, and capacity for learning. And we use those dimensions to select our context-specific indicators of livelihood resilience. The survey participants were also asked about the climatic and socioeconomic pressures affecting their livelihoods to enable us the characterization of the vulnerability context in the project site. I should stress that the framework is specifically designed to measure changes in the characteristics of vulnerability and livelihood resilience before and after the intervention, and both for households who participated in the intervention and those who did not. And this allowed us to assess the impact of the project activities by utilizing a method called difference in differences, which is commonly used in econometrics to measure policy or intervention outcomes. The intervention impact in our study is the difference between the participants' households and non-participants' households across time. Next slide, please. In terms of the results, the comparison of socio-demographic data of participants and non-participants' households suggests that wealthier and more powerful members of the community were involved more in the program activities. Specifically, the results suggest that participants' households have households heads that were more educated. They also had more access to mobile phones, and they were bigger in size. And participants' households were also less poor than non-participants' households, despite the project intention to target the poorer and more vulnerable members of the community. So we can see that this data definitely shows that a gap still exists between project desire to recruit the most vulnerable members of the community and the reality, and such selection bias often leads to poor representation of the most vulnerable members that were on many occasions not consulted about the project activities, but were negatively affected by it, which we discuss later in the presentation. Next slide, please. As I mentioned previously, one of the project objectives was to reduce vulnerability to climate change. And what we observed in the field and what the participants of the study reported themselves is that the rainfall and the related livelihood pressures have changed during the course of the project. As it can be seen on the rainfall graph, at the start of the project in 2016 and into 2017, the East Uzambara, like most of the region of East Africa, experienced severe drought from El Nino event. On the other hand, in the second half of the project, in 2018 into 2019, the rainfall was particularly abundant. We performed also analysis of the rainfall data between 1969 and 2019, and they confirmed that the rainfall is very variable in the East Uzambara Mountains. However, there was no evidence of a long-term decline or increase in the rainfall in the area. Our results also show that the vulnerability context of households changed during the course of the project, and many indicators of vulnerability, especially those related to climatic pressures. I selected some here, like crop pests and diseases, crop failure from drought, and soil erosion. Those indicators improved during the course of the project. However, it was not related to the project activities because there was no statistical differences between the participants and non-participants' households. On the other hand, some indicators of socioeconomic pressures worsen over time. For example, getting poor price for produce or land shortages, although this also cannot be attributed to the project activities. Again, there was no differences between those who participated and those who did not. And we proposed one explanation as to why participants and non-participants households were similarly vulnerable despite the presence of the intervention. That we think that the project mostly focused on one climatic event, which is drought, and its impact possibly became less relevant where the climatic conditions changed from drought to heavy rainfall. And participants of the study complained that the drought-resistant seeds did not perform well in heavy rainfall, and for that reason, the yield from these introduced seeds was not satisfactory. And therefore, the study concludes that there is a necessity of a thorough investigation and a broader range of shocks and stresses and their effects on livelihoods to inform adaptation and resilience intervention. Particularly in this region, in Tanzania, in northeastern region of Tanzania, the climate projections are not really clear-cut, and although drought is considered as an important livelihood risk, increased rainfall and extreme rainfall events are also probable. Therefore, practitioners should take into account increased climatic uncertainty when designing resilience and adaptation interventions to prevent from solutions that might become maladaptive in the future. Next slide, please. And finally, in terms of livelihood resilience outcomes, the project had the most positive impact on the capacity for learning dimension of livelihood resilience, as it was very committed to disseminating knowledge through group work and also providing hands-on training to the participants' households. Our modeling results also suggest that the project had positive impact on self-organization processes through expanding social networks. On the other hand, the project had no impact on important indicators of buffer capacity, such as overall income or tree and livestock ownership and market services, although the project implemented activities such as income generating activities and searching for new markets. The interviews with farmers revealed that agricultural income did not significantly increase due to poor uptake of those climate smart agricultural technologies, and also poor performance of those seeds due to heavy rainfall, like I mentioned before. Also, other income generating activities like butterfly farming were affected by the project, by a nationwide ban on exporting wildlife, which also included the butterfly pupae. This research also provided evidence that certain activities of the project created negative unintended externalities for the non-participating households. One such example is the access to agricultural services. For instance, non-participants' households complained that district extension staff possibly became too occupied with the project activities, which negatively affected everyday services that should be provided to every farmer in the village, those who didn't participate as well. And quote 1 on the right-hand side illustrates this point. Also, the project parallelly ran or introduced environmental bylaws that prohibited planting certain crops in the farms located near the waterways. And again, these bylaws disproportionately affected those who did not participate, but and they were not also provided with any kind of alternatives to compensate for that. Also, the introduced new knowledge, including various climate smart agricultural technologies, were sometimes perceived by some farmers and village leaders as kind of redundant or disconnected from the community's own vision that oscillated around cultivation of cash crops, such as spices, and quote number 3 presents this point. The project emphasis on promotion of some CSA technologies in food production, particularly terracing and planting of maize and other food crops, was, like I said, perceived not entirely relevant because farmers were kind of transforming or wanting to transform their farms into spice farms rather than planting food crops. So overall, the findings indicate that project-based interventions can potentially be successful in transmitting new knowledge during the intervention period. However, the transmission of knowledge alone is not sufficient for a meaningful modification of the capacity base that are necessary for resilience building. And we trace this to those short funding mechanisms where short-term projects doesn't allow for effective transfer of knowledge into action. And I think I will finish on that, and I will pass it to Harriet now. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Marta. So building on the work that Marta's just presented, I'm going to be taking a deeper look into how people engage with interventions and the outcomes they derive. So I'm going to be talking through some of the research that we've been doing in the same region that Marta's been talking about. And through this research, we've been examining who has access to and is able to benefit from interventions, and importantly, who does not and why. So a quick recap of the study site. So we were looking at 2 interventions in Tanga region, one in Muheza District, which is the one Marta's just been speaking about, which is the EU-funded project, and the second in neighbouring Lushoto District, which is the CCAF's Climate Smart Villages, so the CGIR-run programme. And both interventions have been promoting various CSA activities, including things like improved seed varieties, soil and water management practices, and also creating community groups like savings and loans associations and demonstration groups. So across both of these projects, we interviewed around 150 farmers who were either directly or indirectly involved. So before I talk through some of the findings, I just want to explain a bit about our thinking in terms of how we're perceiving and conceiving innovation within this project. So for us, innovation is it's an ongoing process of change. It's very complex and it's also non-linear. So it's much more than just a technology. It's this integration of 3 interconnected components. So it's Orgware, software, hardware. So Orgware describes this ordering of formal and informal institutions and organizations. Software is about knowledge and processes of models of thinking, teaching, learning, language, and communication. And then hardware is where this technology aspect fits in. So it's about these technologies and practices. And in the context of CSA interventions, particularly these 2, where the programs are kind of working with smallholder farmers, and smallholder farmers are the intended beneficiaries of innovation, this framing of Orgware, software, hardware is actually quite limiting because it doesn't necessarily understand or help to understand the complex dynamics and differences between smallholders. So we've added in another kind of aspect to this around thinking about affordances, and these help to describe farmers' abilities to attend and understand training sessions or use particular technology or a practice and realize benefits from those. And these kind of things depend on their individual characteristics. And this includes things like their intrinsic capacity, so their knowledge, their physical strength, their health, the resources they have access to, so financial, land, labor, the properties of an object or environment, so like a technology, for example, and also the perceived opportunity of that. And likewise, innovation processes they don't exist in this blank state environment. They're embedded into a broader situational context where factors like environmental factors, economic, historical, political, social, they all play a role in shaping affordances and ultimately the innovation processes. So combining this affordance thinking with the hardware, software, Orgware components of innovation gives us a more farmer-oriented perspective of innovation. And this helps us to explore the diversity of innovation processes, to understand why some people engage with and derive benefits from CSA programs and why others don't. So I'm going to talk a bit through some of the findings, and I've structured these around those three components, so the Orgware, software, hardware. And I'm going to highlight using kind of these ideas around affordances of context, about kind of highlighting how there are differentiated experiences of each of these, drawing on the results from our interviews. So starting off with Orgware, as I mentioned before, both programs created these farmer groups for demonstration, teaching and learning, and also for savings and loans. And these were designed to support CSA implementation and upscaling. In the CCAS program in Lushoto, the farmer groups were kind of randomly selected, so membership was random. But in the EU program in Muheza, the project prescribed gender equal representation, and they also had requirements for members to represent more vulnerable backgrounds. Membership was also voluntary for these farmer groups. But despite kind of this voluntary nature, within our interviews, there were experiences of group exclusivity. So the quote at the top there was from a farmer who was involved in one of these groups, but their experience was that there was selfishness and nepotism at the demonstration group, so they left them. And so although there were these challenges around membership and exclusivity, we did find that community groups were really excellent in terms of creating space for innovation, in terms of creating space for knowledge sharing, and also improving people's access to resources. So in the CCAS program in Lushoto, through the savings and loans groups, farmers were connected directly to the suppliers of seeds. And then they had the loans through the groups that supported the ability to purchase them. But we also found some challenges in these groups, so the financial groups, in that participation was largely limited to those with sufficient financial resources required for initial and then continued deposits and repayments. And also anxiety about repayments and a certain lacking trust in other people's ability to repay was quite a common reason for people not to engage in these institutions. So moving on to software, through our interviews, we kind of discovered that there's this diverse source of information and learning across both study sites. So you have more perhaps informal routes and sources with friends, family, neighbours, to more formal arrangements with, for example, input shops, extension services, schools, and then obviously through these interventions. But we found that farmers' personal social networks were central to them accessing information, and there were barriers, so things like location, age, gender, that constrained farmers' access to information. Similarly, in kind of the farmer groups and in attending training sessions, there were a lot of people had experienced conflicting activities. So things like attending livestock, childcare, ill health, old age, and these were often unavoidable challenges that conflicted with training sessions. And so what we actually found was that those most affected tended to be women and also the elderly. But outside of these groups, a lot of learning also occurred, and a lot of it occurred through independent experimentation, where farmers were trialing technologies and practices. But this ability to experiment requires a farmer to be able to take risk, particularly taking risk of failure. And actually what we found was that experimentation was limited to those typically with more resources, so having that ability to carry that risk. Our data also highlighted that, you know, trust between implementers and communities is really important for implementation, because it can support confidence in and acceptance of new technologies and practices. And this is demonstrated quite nicely in that first quote at the top, where we had a farmer saying the skills were taught by experts, which means every method has been tested and approved. But we also found that some farmers raised concerns around kind of deviating from the correct implementation, which is illustrated in that second quote. And we had a farmer who said, "I've not dared make any experiments. I work on the terraces according to the way we were instructed during farm demonstration." And these narratives of farmers who are quite reluctant to adapt or experiment raises some concern, because it may reduce the relevance of inherent experimentation and local knowledge. But what we know from the literature is that local knowledge and indigenous knowledge is a critical component of climate adaptation. And it's also very important in terms of scaling CSA. So we found that trust is important, but we also found that it's quite fragile and can be quite easily eroded. And this is particularly when there are unintended outcomes, such as those that Marta kind of mentioned before, or when there are unrealized expectations. And these kind of things have implications for long-term relationships between communities and practitioners, and have implications for the potential of future programs to deliver positive outcomes. So last but not least, looking at hardware. So we found that changes in farming practices were very diverse and also temporally variable. And through our interviews, they demonstrated a huge variation between farming systems. We also found that uptake of hardware was non-linear. So, for example, the continuation of some hardware, particularly more capital intensive, requires farmers to be able to consistently generate income. And larger reinvestments are typically dependent on consecutive successful harvests, because you get a lot of money in one go. But the context of these farming systems, so they're mainly rain-fed, they're low input, smallholding farmer systems, they're actually very, as Marta's already mentioned, they're highly vulnerable to weather variability, and also other things like crop pest and disease, market fluctuation, and things like ill health within the family. And because of these kind of challenges, application of hardware is very dynamic, and it emerges alongside and in response to the context and the conditions of farmer livelihoods. And we saw this, and we saw a lot of differences across what is quite a relatively small study site. And these can be explained in part by farmers' affordances, so the intrinsic capacities, the resources they have, and the situational context. And the first quote in the top there shows this quite nicely, in that we had a farmer saying, "The major challenge is money. If you don't have money, you can't farm more efficiently, because seeds, fertilizer, pesticides, they all require money." And it was very common in our interviews to hear farmers talk about how they would switch between high and low cost inputs, or temporarily stop or reduce certain activities, largely in response to changing personal circumstances. And this second quote at the top there, where we have a farmer saying, "I've never stopped using fertilizer, but if I don't have money, then I use manure as an alternative," is quite a nice illustration of this. But these diverse patterns of adoption, where farmers stop using a technology and then subsequently re-adopt when circumstances are more favourable, they're quite difficult to record. And so it means they're poorly recognised in programme evaluation, which typically oversimplify the complexities of these innovation processes. A final point from hardware is that timing matters. And changes to farming practices takes time. So as Marta mentioned in her presentation, the EU project has a bit of a challenge with the bean seeds, in that they were a variety intended for drought resilience, but that year was particularly wet. And so they struggled with these short-term variabilities, in this case for weather. But in Lushoto, so the CCAFS program, the program has been in operation and has been operating since 2011. So much longer program timeline, and this reduces the risk of this short-term variability, which is something that the EU project struggled with. So that is the end of my presentation. I think now I'm back to you, Marta, with some reflections and recommendations.
Yeah, thank you, Harriet. Yeah, so point number one, we conclude that funding should prioritize long-term in situ programs at subnational levels, because like Harriet mentioned, innovation and the realization of benefits from CSA interventions takes time and also continued investment. So the key is to increasing capacities at subnational level, at ward, district and regional levels, and also funding long-term projects, even plus 10 years at local levels. We could see from the presentations that short project cycles do not really allow participants to build the buffering capacities and realize project benefits in the short term. And as such, the dissemination of education should go in tandem with building capacities that help to realize this transfer of knowledge into real actions. And point number two is perhaps the most frequently spoken about, that interventions, CSA interventions, but frankly, any development intervention needs to be designed in partnership with the local communities to better reflect the local context and also address needs of local people. And Harriet's presentation showed that various challenges in attending farmers' sessions exist, especially for women, for older people, for poorer farmers. And this demonstrates how the most vulnerable groups require this additional support to participate and realize benefits from such project. And also there is the question of the relevance of implemented interventions, how they actually reflect the community's own visions. And my final point here is also what Harriet mentioned, where livelihoods largely rely on rain-fed agriculture. Variable weather is an important factor that influence the vulnerability context of livelihoods. Therefore, projects which are designed to reduce vulnerability should pay attention to this variability and uncertainty and apply more of a risk-informed design to avoid those maladaptive outcomes in the future. Thanks.
So final reflections from me. Number 4 is CSA programs should meaningfully engage with existing power dynamics to ensure inclusivity. So the reports of group exclusivity in both the training groups and the financial groups highlight how an inability to address local social dynamics can lead to membership formation that reinforces prevailing power hierarchies. And ultimately, this excludes marginalized groups and further widens social inequalities. So programs need to consider how to meaningfully engage with these existing power dynamics to support inclusivity. And one way to do that is to build in regular program evaluation, reflection to address these challenges. Number 5, broader program monitoring is needed to capture non-linear innovation processes, consider trade-offs, and avoid unintended outcomes. So our research has highlighted how quite narrow metrics for program monitoring, evaluation, and reporting risks overlooking unintended outcomes, and also struggles to account for the dynamic and non-linearity of innovation processes. But by combining methods, so quantitative and qualitative methods, including ethnographic approaches like Marta's work, can support more holistic and nuanced understanding of program outcomes and innovation processes. Penultimate, number 6, efforts to promote CSA practices and technologies should simultaneously support off-farm activities. So the example of the uptake of continual use of investment-heavy technologies requiring, this consistent income generation. And so as a result, smallholder farming systems are very diverse and they draw on a range of resources, including off-farm activities and enterprises. And so CSA interventions should consequently support off-farm activities to nurture on-farm innovation and uptake of CSA technologies and practices. And last but not least, before I hand back to Susie, research co-design is needed to generate targeted knowledge that supports innovation and monitoring. And this is co-design between academics, between development practitioners, between extension services, and importantly, between farmers and farming communities. Back to you, Susie.
Thank you, Harriet and Marta. So building on lessons from elsewhere in Tanzania and our research findings that have been presented today, the next steps within the AFRICAP project, which now is coming to is in its final year, in the final months of the programme. We will be working with the National Climate Smart Agriculture Alliance and the Economic and Social Research Foundation, who are the key implementing partners on the AFRICAP project in Tanzania, to support the call from these farmers, from the agricultural extension workers in the region we've been working in, and particularly the district officers in Muheza District, where some of this work was conducted, to establish a district learning alliance, which we hope will create opportunities to bring stakeholders together to share the knowledge and experiences of climate risk and climate smart agriculture intervention and innovation across these project areas, and informed by this research, to build capacity and upscale learning on what works and what does not, where, under what circumstances, for whom and why, to help co-create new action-based and solutions-orientated research that very much is informed by the local communities, the farmers, and the practitioners on the ground, to answer the most pertinent knowledge gaps that remain, and to promote local policy engagement activities, to feed local planning ideas and policies up into national level, and to work together to develop local tools and strategies to build resilience in agricultural and associated food systems within this subnational context. As a partner, the University of Leeds and the wider AFRICAP team will directly feed our latest evidence from our research, which is still being published, in the process of publication and preparation and write-up. We will be feeding that latest evidence down to local levels, as well as into national level policy discussions through the Learning Alliance in Muheza, and to provide support to seek further resources to support ongoing collaboration and partnership, both at subnational and at national levels. So just to finish, another acknowledgement to all those that have been engaged in this work and supported this work, who we have previously mentioned. And lastly, to flag any, the current outputs that are associated with this work, that are accessible online, but also that there are additional outputs in the publication, in the review stage of academic journals at the moment, linked to this work, which we would be happy to share in due course to those who are interested. Before I pass back to Tembi, I'd just like to encourage anyone with questions to post those in the Q&A box so that they can be organised. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Harriet. And thank you, Marta, for the presentation, for outlining in detail the work that you have been conducting. I think it's been quite a mouthful. I was taking notes furiously. But I think let me not abuse my position as the chair by asking a question already. Let me hand over first to Dr. John Recha, who is with the CCAF's program at ILRI, to sort of provide some reflective response and try to situate AFRICAP's research, the research that Marta has presented within the sort of broader, ambitious context of upscaling climate-smart agriculture. John, I know you work quite a bit in East Africa, and a lot of what has been presented will be familiar to you. So please just give us your thoughts on how this research fits within the broader context of upscaling climate-smart agriculture in East Africa. Over to you, John. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sithembile and previous speakers. As you're all aware, the program of AFRICAP aims to identify and implement evidence-based policy pathways that facilitate the development of sustainable, productive, climate-smart agriculture systems that meet the food security and economic development needs of Africa. Based on the work that the Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security Program, CCAFS, has done within the Eastern and Southern Africa region, may I mention some reflections altogether here that feed into the actions that are done by the CG system. And these are actions to transform food systems under climate change. From the work that has been done by AFRICAP and recommendations that have been given by previous speakers, including Harriet and even Susannah, there is an opportunity for the Africa project to feed into these main action areas that seek to transform food systems in Eastern and Southern Africa. And nothing short of a systematic transformation of food systems is required if we are to feed the region's people and future population sustainably under climate change. And these are in four main action areas. The first one is rerouting farming and rural livelihoods to new trajectories. What does this entail? Four sub-actions are involved in this. The first sub-action being ensuring that there is zero agricultural land expansion on landscapes that have got high carbon. For example, there are carbon-rich landscapes, which are the tropical African forests. And in these areas, there is sometimes ongoing agricultural expansion, but this is mostly driven by few market commodities. There are multiple initiatives in sub-Saharan Africa that are there already in the region to hold investors and purchasers of these commodities to be accountable to minimize deforestation, regulate the use of land, and reduce pressures on land use change. Hope that through these initiatives, we will build on these efforts to more comprehensively include all high carbon landscapes which have got trees growing there to enable rapid and ambitious mitigation to be achieved, because that is one of the pillars of climate smart agriculture. And as you know, productivity increase, that's per unit area, is part and parcel of the pillars of climate smart agriculture. Hence, this is important. The second sub-activity under this rerouting, farming, and rural livelihoods to new trajectories is to enable markets and public sector actions to incentivize the climate resilient and low emission practices. For example, the persistent yield gaps that are there and climate variability that are there in sub-Saharan Africa can be dealt with by climate resilient practices that are known to improve productivity, but whose adoption is low. So market-based approaches can provide incentives to adopt if producers see the benefit to this practices for their livelihoods. So in this case, the high risks to production and marketing, including market risks, can be overcome, and the smallholder farmers end up being winners and engaging in this productivity using these practices. But at the same time, these market enablers and public sector actions need to be able to be advancing gender equality and opportunities for the youth to be involved as a priority. The third sub-action under this is supporting prosperity through mobility and rural reinvigoration. What I mean by that is there are common trends in rural areas because of lack of jobs sometimes and difficulty in infrastructure. There's movement to urban areas and leading to a shortage of labor in these areas altogether. Now, increasing agricultural and managerial wages will be useful in retaining people in the rural areas, making these people to stay there by having infrastructure there and at the same time building their skills and opportunities so that agriculture is a viable option in these rural areas, which of course have the majority of the smallholder farmers, will be important in making migration to be controlled and at the same time enhancing productivity, resilience, and maximizing the value of ecosystem services that are there in rural areas. And the fourth, apart from that, the second major action is supposed to focus on de-risking livelihoods on the farms. And this de-risking comes about in this manner. If we can have secure, resilient livelihoods and value chains through early warning system and climate information services, that will be useful. For example, the CCAPS program recently got $60 million US dollars from the World Bank for a new project called Accelerating the Impact of CGIAR Climate Research for Africa project called ICRA. This project seeks to bring in place partnership that will enhance the access of climate information services and validate climate smart agriculture technologies in Africa, and hence gaining better access to climate advisories to be linked to information about effective response to farmers, crop producers, and livestock keepers. This is important. Now, for us to continue getting these benefits, it is important that the millions of farmers that are there in sub-Saharan Africa, in Eastern Southern Africa, are capable of accessing the information that will make them be able to make decisions and plan on time, including early warning and, where possible, adaptive safety net programs altogether. They have the potential of securing more resilient livelihoods for the millions of farmers in Eastern and Southern Africa. Another aspect under the de-risking as a sub-action is helping farmers to make better choices. And this is normally done by having tools, technologies, and knowledge that make the farmers to be able to adopt them all together and humbly end up doing the farming activities with support from agriculture extension services. From the AFRICAP work, it has been mentioned that agriculture extension was essential for the uptake of climate-smart agriculture. Now, as there are challenges in making available resources to be at scale and equitably, there is a need to meet the needs of the diverse beneficiaries of these CSA, technologies and innovations. And that also includes across the gender and socioeconomic status. So The challenge includes the capacity, technological, and institutional elements altogether that can deliver services at scale to farmers. And this can leverage on ICT and other digital technologies and support of public-private partnerships. One of those public-private partnerships that I'm seeing that CCAF's program is involved in right now is a program called Climate Resilient Agribusiness for Tomorrow that is going on up there 2023 in Eastern Africa. And it is enhancing having climate risk analysis for value chains, identifying what can be done, and then at the same time end up supporting them to move forward with the next actions. And the third aspect of action to transform food security in sub-Saharan Africa is to reduce emissions from diets and value chains. One aspect of it as a sub-action is shifting to healthy, sustainable, climate-friendly diets, where we are aware that beef production contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, yes, but in Africa, this can be dealt with and in a way of helping to bring into place activities that can help rangelands to be sustainable. And because livestock will continue to play an important role in nutrition, in the economy, and in the social life of the people in Eastern and Southern Africa. The second sub-activity around that is reducing food loss and waste. There are numerous opportunities for reducing food loss and waste, and this includes, the livestock sector, the vegetables, fruits, dairy, roots, and tubers. And for that, the use of improved practices and technologies is being advocated for in the region, and Africa has, of course, made that recommendation altogether. The last but not least action to transform food system in Eastern Southern Africa, which has also been targeted by AFRICAP, is realigning policies, finance, support to social movements, and innovation. Under this aspect, implementing policy and institutional changes to enable transformation is important, and that recommendation came out quite well. And for this, if there are policies that can help in a way to subsidize and incentivize the private sector to be involved, that will be a game changer because they have got some money that can help in financing the transformation of the rural world in East and Southern Africa. At the same time, it is dominated by smallholder farmers. And therefore, this kind of private sector that has got small companies that are involved can actually be energized to be able to take actions that focus on low power dynamics related to gender, social inclusion, and youth, and benefit the rural population. Another sub-action there is unlocking sustainable finance, using microfinance institutions that are there. And this is useful because at the global level, we are looking at reducing the climate footprint, carbon footprint, in terms of reducing by 2 degrees Celsius, the climate commitments of the Paris Agreement. And this will be a way of addressing the core market failures to move sustainable land use financing into the mainstream and unlock private sector investment that's needed in sub-Saharan Africa. Second, last, is driving social change into more sustainable solutions. By that, is influencing behavioral change by producers and consumers alike in Eastern and Southern Africa, where through the governmental organizations, through social movements, and even development organizations and governments, policies are put in place to promote changes in consumer habits. This will help by linking science to the social movements altogether, and therefore educating the masses about ways to consume food, bring youth into the discussion, prioritize improving awareness through education, and then help it. And lastly, transform innovation systems to deliver at scale. What that basically means is there are resources that can drive growth in the agricultural sector. And these resources are there in sub-Saharan Africa. So this that is there altogether is to help catalyze innovation through research and development partners, national key research organizations all together, so that there is impact in terms of the research needs to better link to the needs of the society in Eastern Africa, in Southern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, that aim at delivering end-to-end solutions for actors in food systems. This will require a rethinking on how research and innovation can be part of the wider systemic change, which is a recommendation that has been given by AFRICAP. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll be able to respond to questions.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much, John. I think you mentioned quite a lot of what AFRICAP is already doing, what CCAF is doing, what needs to be done to sort of implement climate smart agriculture at scale. I'm quite aware of the time that we are now remaining with just under 20 minutes. And on that time, I want to sort of get Mr. Makundi's thoughts on this before we maybe look at some of the questions that have come through the Q&A and the chat. Mr. Makundi, you are charged with monitoring environmental protection compliance in the agriculture sector. You are also responsible for actually promoting the adoption of climate smart agriculture technologies and practices across Tanzania. Having listened to the presentation from Susie, Harriet, and Marta, and also John's intervention just now, how useful is all this to your work?
Thank you, Martha. Yes, the presentation is very useful. Thank you for all presenters. And also Dr. Recha, John, has preempted because he has addressed all issues which was maybe summarized from the presentation, that the recommendation given and the summary from Dr. Recha
I think maybe you are muted, Dr. Makundi, or there's a connection challenge. We can't really hear you quite well. I don't know if it's just me or it's across. I think we've actually lost him. I'm not seeing him. Mr. Makundi, unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm okay now. My internet connection is not good, but let me proceed. I say, as a Minister of Agriculture, and my responsibility was to upscale the CSA issues to ensure that these CSA issues are well known to our local governments. And what we are doing as a recommendation from when we developed the CSA is to ensure that the CSA guideline is mainstreamed into district development budget, so that they can be implemented by lower levels or the actual implementers on the ground. By having to ensure that the CSA is implemented, we need to have budget for it. As the other presenter said, the challenge we have is a fund. We may have a lot of good suggestion or practice which is needed on the ground, but because we don't have enough fund to implement, that's why we integrate it or we mainstream it in our local district budget, so that we can allocate a fund for implementation of those activities. But in addition to that, we request funds from other partners, as we have support from USDA, a project which building capacity for rural for resilience food security project, which support us a lot in ensuring that the CSA practices and the technology are well implemented on the ground. Also, as now, we are trying to ensure the councillors who are the budget decider, or when we do the budget for district planning, is the one who can decide who will get how much and who will get maybe much money or low money for implementing the activities. So that as we know, awareness for these policymakers is very low, we intend to raise the awareness, and that's what we are doing now in partnership with this BSc FRS project. We are trying to make sure that all policymakers on the district have good awareness on CSA issues, so that they can put more priority on CSA issues rather than say this is not important, as they used to say. But also, as you know, we depend on agriculture depend much on weather information. So we insist all project or partners to support us to ensure that our farmers will get weather information and services in right time, so that they can decide what to do during the crop season. So we did a lot, but the limiting factors is a fund is not enough to upscale these issues. And also we need maybe the request from farmers. They need to see the project which will show them the evidence of addressing climate change issues. For example, drip, when you say issue of drip irrigation, the farmers, they need maybe farm field school, which shows the drip irrigation on the ground and how they can use them. And we need maybe to have access of these irrigation infrastructure in a cheap price, so that if more farmers can cope, or they can be able to buy those drip irrigation equipment and installation. So those are things which we are trying to but the limited factors is fund to support those. First of all, to educate to raise awareness. Second, to access these practices and the technology which are CSA oriented in a cheap price. Also, as John said, we have the problem of post-harvest loss, of which now we need now also support from that area, that we can rescue our farmers from getting a big loss from after harvest. We have a serious problem of issue of getting maybe information, weather information access to more farmers, so that they can think how they can decide, which will help them to decide when they can plant their crops, which kind of crops they need to grow, so that they can cope with the weather or the climate impact. And also researchers, we need to support the researchers on how they can help farmers to develop the climate smart interventional practices and technologies in a cheapest way. Because when you depend from maybe seed, to buy seed, improve the seed, which is from outside our country, is very cost compared to when we use our researcher to develop those seeds. So we insist to have support from different partners to have these seeds in a good price that most farmers can afford. So we have a lot, but our limited factors is
funding.
Is fund.
Yeah. Well,
Yes,
thank you, Mr. Makundi, for that intervention. I think John almost answered your question on funding, because you mentioned that CCAF's received 60 million from the World Bank. So you might want to have a chat with John about that 60 million. It might solve a lot of your problems. All right, so thank you so much for the interventions. I think it's clear what the priorities for the government of Tanzania is, and there is opportunity for partners to come in. I think that's what I also heard you say, which is very exciting and very good for everybody that's listening on here, because there's space for partners to come in and work with the government of Tanzania. So now quickly, before our session runs out, I think in the question and answer section, most of the questions have been answered, but there is one that's asking how climate smart agriculture interventions are different from conventional interventions that are focused on improving smallholder farmers' livelihoods, other than taking into account that interventions cannot do more harm to the environment than they benefit the farmers' livelihood. So there's an interesting question there that has come in. Of course, other questions that were asked was, what are the recommendations to increase resilience and preparedness for rainfall variability, which our presenters spoke a bit about. And there was also a question on whether the project provides any insight into the potential role of private sector. So I will want to give Susie, Harriet, and Marta an opportunity to respond. And also maybe John, you can also come in to help explain a bit on the difference between climate smart agriculture and conventional agriculture as it has been put. Susie, maybe you can take the question on some of the recommendations on increasing resilience and preparedness for rainfall variability, I think. Then I think we will then move from there for any other interventions.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, one particularly interesting, alongside the local level research we've done here on innovation and CSA implementation through programs, has been the climate science work in AFRICAP project, which has ultimately shown that Tanga region, where we've been working, is one of the most difficult regions we have to project in terms of impacts will be in relation to climate change moving forwards. So uncertainty is just a characteristic of the climate, and although we know that the temperatures are increasing and rainfall extremes are likely to, extreme events are likely to increase in the future. And actually, in terms of preparedness for rainfall variability, preparedness for all eventualities is definitely seems to be the case in the Tanga region in particular, with that lack of uncertainty. And some of that climate science work has also looked at the potential benefits of the terracing that has been initiated within both the East and the West Disan boroughs, and certainly, that from that modelling work, it certainly shows that it is a very important potential strategy for reducing the impacts of heavy extreme rainfall events on soil erosion. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question adequately, but I think there is a need to think about preparedness, but given the uncertainty of climate the climate projections, there is, it goes hand in hand with building resilience. And I would argue it's a component part of building resilience. So I hope that somehow answers your question, but it's very important as in amongst building resilience, and certainly is being considered within the strategies. I can also speak to the other question if you want me to, which was about how does climate smart agriculture intervention vary from other agriculture intervention. And I think ultimately there's two component parts or three component parts of it. The first is considering the climate science and the climate risk in amongst planning for agriculture. It's about building resilience and thinking about adaptation to climate shocks and stresses. And also it incorporates consideration of the mitigation of carbon emissions. So thinking about what activities are being conducted perhaps from a carbon sequestration perspective, or in terms of reducing emissions from agriculture. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Susie, for answering that. John, I don't know if you want to add on to that.
Yes, please. Climate smart agriculture has got outstanding characteristics. And the first, as has been mentioned by Susannah, is it addresses climate change. Contrary to conventional agriculture, CSA integrates climate change into the planning, development of, and even operations of the agricultural systems. The second aspect that makes it outstanding and different is it integrates multiple goals and manages trade-offs. There are three pillars, adaptation, there is mitigation, productivity. And what happens is, it's not possible to achieve all the three. But when it comes to implementing climate smart agriculture, trade-offs are done, and identifying and weighing the cost and benefits, and then take the best in terms of what to do in a given area. And then three, it maintains ecosystem services like clean air, water, food, materials, and it does not contribute to their degradation in the environment. And then, of course, also, it has got different entry points in terms of technologies. And the thing here is there are insurance schemes, value chains, and mixes of institutions. And it goes beyond one single technology at the farm level. It integrates multiple so that the food system and the landscape and the value chain and the policy integration brings about benefits, and it's all context specific, meaning one climate smart practice in one place may not be climate smart in another. So it takes into place the climate risks, and then lastly, it engages very much the women, the youth, and marginalized groups. Because for us in Africa, they play a key role in our agricultural systems. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John, for that response. I'm mindful that we're only left with 2 minutes on the clock. So I want to maybe just get back to Harriet and Marta to see if they have any reflections based on the questions that came through the chat. Harriet, perhaps you can go first.
Yeah, I just checking through them. I think I can speak a bit to the question about private sector, and that I think it's important, and this is something that John mentioned as well, but in terms of value chain development and kind of the role in the private sector in supporting that. Yeah, so that would be my brief reflection, I think.
Thanks, Harriet. Marta, do you have any comments? Final words in the last minutes?
Yeah, maybe about how to think about the uncertainty and preparedness for those kind of scenarios. I think scenario planning is the most kind of obvious, which brings stakeholders together and really provide this shared ground for conversations. And I think realizing, because drought is kind of in everybody's mind, but realizing that sometimes even in rainforest can rain too much is also, I think, important kind of reflection. And our presentations or my research proved that that some people are concerned about too much rain as well. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much to the Team AFRICAP. Thank you so much to Dr. John Recha from CCAF Skillery. And thank you so much to Mr. Prosper Makundi from EMU in Tanzania. I think most of the questions that have been asked, especially through the Q&A, have been answered. Those questions that have not been asked, you should feel free to get in touch with the AFRICAP team. I think the email address was flashed earlier. And you can also visit our website, africap.info, to get more information on the work that we are doing. I would also like to, I think at this point, acknowledge our partners in Tanzania, being led by the Economic and Social Research Foundation, ESRF, that are helping to coordinate the work in Tanzania. And we are also grateful for the partnership with CCAFs and with the government of Tanzania in a lot of the work that we do. There will be papers and policy briefs and other communication type projects that will come out from the work that's happening in Tanzania. So please visit the AFRICAP website from time to time to check for any updates. We also have another webinar that's going to be coming up in April. Please be on the lookout for that, and hopefully you can join us again for yet another interesting discussion session on what AFRICAP is doing. To my presenters and the discussant, thank you very much for your time and for sharing your inputs. I think from my end, this is where I sort of hand over to the tech team to maybe just put that slide through with the information on AFRICAP. Of course, Lauren has dropped the AFRICAP website info on the chat box. Please do get in touch and stay safe until we see each other again. And for those that are just starting their day, enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.